Picture standing in the dim glow of an ancient Egyptian tomb, surrounded by artifacts untouched for thousands of years. The air is thick with the scent of spices and resin, remnants of a sacred ritual so precise it defies time itself. This wasn't just burial, it was a transformation, a meticulous process designed to guide the soul into eternity. The ancient Egyptians didn't merely preserve bodies, they mastered a science so advanced that even today, we're still unraveling its secrets. What if I told you that behind every wrapped linen bandage and ornate sarcophagus lay 26 mind-blowing techniques, each one a testament to a civilization that saw death not as an end, but as a gateway to something greater? Think about the sheer ambition of it all. In a world without modern tools or chemicals, Egyptian embalmers achieved what seems impossible. They stopped decay in its tracks, crafting a legacy that would endure for millennia. But how? What hidden knowledge did they possess? The answers lie in a blend of spirituality, innovation, and an almost supernatural attention to detail. From the precise removal of internal organs to the use of rare, fragrant resins that repelled bacteria, every step was a calculated act of reverence and science. And here's the astonishing part: many of these methods were so effective that we've only recently begun to understand their brilliance with modern technology. This is more than a history lesson. It's a journey into the heart of an ancient mystery. Over the next few minutes, we'll peel back the layers of time to explore these 26 techniques, each one a piece of a puzzle that reveals how the Egyptians conquered decay. You'll discover how they turned the human body into a timeless artifact, why certain rituals were performed with such precision, and what these practices tell us about their beliefs in the afterlife. By the end, you won't just know how mummification worked, you'll feel the weight of its significance, the awe it inspires even now. So take a moment to imagine yourself in that tomb, surrounded by the echoes of the past, because what you're about to learn will change the way you see history forever. The moment death arrived, the ancient Egyptians understood the journey had only just begun. Before the first incision or preserving salt touched the body, a sacred transformation was already underway. Picture a hushed chamber near the Nile's edge, where priests in leopard skin robes circled the deceased, their voices rising in rhythmic chants. This wasn't mere ritual, it was a spiritual lifeline. The body would be washed not just with water, but with the very essence of the Nile itself, believed to carry the power of Osiris, god of the afterlife. Each drop was a promise. Just as the river's floods brought life to the land, this purification would bring rebirth to the soul, but the cleansing went deeper than the physical. Bundles of frankincense and myrrh burned in bronze censers, their smoke curling into the shape of protective deities. The priests knew evil spirits lurked in the shadows, waiting to disrupt the soul's journey. With every uttered prayer, they wove an invisible shield around the body, a barrier against chaos. Imagine the weight of this responsibility. One mistake, one omitted verse, and the soul might wander forever. That's why only the highest-ranking priests, the Heri Seshta, were permitted to perform these rites. Their words weren't just prayers, they were maps guiding the deceased through the treacherous Juwat, the Egyptian underworld. What's truly remarkable is how these spiritual acts mirrored the precision of the mummification process itself. The washing wasn't haphazard, it followed strict patterns, mimicking the cosmic order of the gods. Even the tools used: natron-soaked cloths, ceremonial knives with ivory handles, were considered divine instruments. This wasn't superstition. To the Egyptians, the boundary between science and religion didn't exist. Purifying the body meant aligning it with the universe's hidden laws, ensuring the physical and spiritual realms would recognize it in the afterlife. Modern archaeologists have found traces of these rituals in tomb paintings and papyri, where every gesture, every ingredient was recorded with meticulous care. Consider the symbolism woven into every step. The Nile's water wasn't just practical, it echoed the primordial ocean of creation, none. The incense wasn't merely fragrant, it was the sweat of the sun god Ra, a celestial disinfectant. This duality reveals the Egyptian mind at work, a culture that saw no division between the tangible and the mystical. When we examine the remains of mummies today, we're not just seeing preserved tissue. We're witnessing the physical echo of a belief system so profound it turned death into an art form. The next time you hear of a mummy's golden mask or amulets, remember, those weren't decorations. They were the final pieces of a sacred puzzle, placed with care during these very rites, each one a key to eternity. One of the most startling moments in the mummification process came when the embalmers reached for their bronze hooks. Picture this, a skilled practitioner inserting a slender, curved tool up the nostril of the deceased, carefully maneuvering it through the narrow passage until it reached the fragile bone separating the nasal cavity from the brain. With precise, almost surgical movements, they would fracture the thin barrier and begin the delicate work of liquefying the brain tissue. Unlike modern medicine, which prizes the brain as the center of thought and memory, the ancient Egyptians saw it as little more than waste, a substance to be removed and discarded without ceremony. This wasn't just a matter of convenience, the act carried profound symbolic weight. In the Egyptian worldview, the heart, not the brain, was the true seat of intelligence, emotion, and moral judgment. It was the heart that would be weighed against the feather of mat in the afterlife, determining whether the soul was worthy of immortality. The brain, by contrast, held no such significance. Yet the method of its removal reveals an astonishing understanding of human anatomy. Without X-rays or detailed medical diagrams, these embalmers knew exactly how to navigate the sinus cavity to reach their target, a testament to generations of accumulated knowledge. Consider the tools they used: bronze hooks, some as long as a forearm, with tips shaped to scrape and stir without causing unnecessary damage to the surrounding bone. Archaeologists have found these instruments buried in embalming workshops, still stained with traces of resin and organic matter. The process itself was methodical. Once the brain was broken apart, the embalmers would tilt the body forward, letting the liquefied tissue drain out through the nose. Sometimes they even flushed the cavity with palm wine or other antiseptic liquids, not just to clean but to ward off decay. What's truly fascinating is how this practice reflects the Egyptians' broader philosophy. By discarding the brain, they were making a deliberate statement about what it meant to be human. Intelligence wasn't housed in the folds of tissue inside the skull. It resided in the heart, the organ they carefully preserved and placed back in the body or stored in a ceremonial jar. This belief shaped everything from their medical practices to their art, where depictions of thought and emotion often centered on the chest, not the head. Modern science has since revealed how advanced their techniques really were. Recent CT scans of mummies show how cleanly the embalmers worked, leaving the delicate structures of the nasal passage largely intact. Some even left behind small linen plugs to prevent fluids from leaking back out, an early form of post-procedure care. It's a reminder that while their understanding of anatomy differed from ours, their skill was undeniable. The next time you hear about this seemingly gruesome step, remember, it wasn't just about emptying the skull. It was a ritual act, a physical manifestation of their deepest beliefs about life, death, and what lies beyond. After the brain's removal, the body faced its most transformative stage, an encounter with natron, the salt that held the power to halt decay itself. This wasn't ordinary table salt, but a miraculous blend harvested from the dried lake beds near the Nile, a mixture of sodium carbonate, bicarbonate, and other minerals that acted like an ancient desiccant. Imagine the scene: the body laid carefully on a sloping embalming table, surrounded by priests who packed every crevice with these glistening white crystals, leaving no inch untouched. For 40 days and 40 nights, the natron worked its silent magic, drawing out every drop of moisture from the tissues, collapsing bacteria's breeding grounds before they could take hold. The brilliance of this method lies in its simplicity. Without modern chemicals or refrigeration, the Egyptians harnessed a natural resource that not only dried the body, but also created an environment too hostile for microorganisms to survive. Modern experiments have shown that natron lowers the pH of tissues, essentially pickling them in a way that locks in structure at a cellular level. That's why, when archaeologists unwrap mummies centuries later, they find skin still supple enough to reveal the walls of fingerprints, tiny ridges pressed into eternity. One researcher described uncurling the fingers of a mummified child and seeing the same delicate patterns that might have clung to a parent's hand 3,000 years ago. But natron's power went beyond mere chemistry. In Egyptian cosmology, salt symbolized purification and eternity, the same substance used to preserve offerings to the gods. The 40-day duration wasn't arbitrary either. It mirrored the annual Nile flood cycle, linking the body's rebirth to the land's renewal. Every step was saturated with meaning. The embalmers even took care to position the body so fluids could drain naturally, often propping the head and feet at slight angles, demonstrating an intuitive grasp of gravity's role in the process. What's often overlooked is how this method varied by social class. While royalty might be submerged in pure, finely ground natron, commoners might receive a cheaper mix bulked with sand or reused salts. Some mummies show signs of incomplete drying where economizing priests cut corners, uneven preservation revealing the cracks in Egypt's otherwise meticulous death industry. Yet even these lesser treatments often surpassed preservation methods used elsewhere in the ancient world. Today, scientists are still uncovering natron's secrets. Advanced imaging has detected trace elements in mummy wrappings that suggest some natron batches were enriched with additional antimicrobial agents like honey or plant resins. This layered approach, combining physical drying with biochemical defense, shows a sophistication we're only beginning to appreciate. When you see a mummy's serene face behind museum glass, you're not just looking at a preserved body. You're witnessing the triumph of a civilization that turned the harsh chemistry of the desert into a bridge between worlds. With the body now dried and purified, the embalmers turned their attention to the delicate task of organ removal, a step that reveals just how intimately the Egyptians understood both the physical and spiritual dimensions of the human form. Imagine the precision required as they made a small incision along the left side of the abdomen, just large enough to reach inside and extract the liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines. These organs, so vital in life, now became sacred relics, each destined for its own ornate guardian. But here's what sets this practice apart: the heart wasn't touched. While modern medicine might prioritize the brain, for the Egyptians, the heart was the undisputed center of being, the organ that would speak for the deceased in the Hall of Judgment. The removed organs weren't discarded. They were treated with reverence, preserved in natron just like the body, then carefully placed inside canopic jars. These weren't simple containers, crafted from alabaster, limestone, or even precious metals. Each jar bore the likeness of a protective deity. The liver was entrusted to Imseti, a human-headed god, the lungs to Hapi, depicted with the face of a baboon, the stomach to Duamutef, jackal-headed, and the intestines to Kebesenuf, who took the form of a falcon. Together, these four sons of Horus stood as eternal sentinels, ensuring no harm would come to the organs they guarded. What's often overlooked is the symbolism woven into every detail. The jar stoppers weren't random. Each deity's head corresponded to one of the cardinal directions, anchoring the deceased in cosmic order. The lungs, linked to breathe, and thus the north wind, fell under Hapi's care. The stomach, associated with digestion and transformation, mirrored Duamutef's role as a guide through change. Even the materials mattered. Alabaster, with its translucent glow, evoked the luminosity of the afterlife, while faience jars shimmered like the Nile under sunlight. The heart's absence from these jars is equally telling. Left nestled in the chest cavity or sometimes carefully sewn back into place after drying, it held the key to the soul's fate. According to the Book of the Dead, in the final judgment, Anubis would place the heart on a golden scale against the feather of Maat, goddess of truth. If it balanced, the soul earned eternal life. If heavy with sin, it would be devoured by the monstrous Ammit. This belief explains why so many mummies were found with heart scarabs, stone amulets inscribed with spells pleading, "Do not stand against me in testimony." Modern CT scans have revealed surprises hidden in these rituals. Some mummies show linen-wrapped organ bundles placed back inside the body, a cheaper alternative for those who couldn't afford full canopic sets. Others reveal organs accidentally left behind, their dried remains still tucked beneath the ribs. But even these mistakes highlight the Egyptians' adaptability, proof that the essence of the ritual mattered more than rigid perfection. When you stand before a canopic jar in a museum today, you're not just seeing ancient pottery. You're witnessing a civilization's unshakable conviction that every part of a person, down to their last breath, deserved a chance at forever. The wrapping of a mummy was no simple task. It was a sacred performance, unfolding over days with the precision of a dance. Picture this, a team of priests standing over the prepared body, their hands moving in practiced rhythms as they unrolled hundreds of yards of linen strips, some as fine as silk, others sturdy as canvas. Each strip had been ritually cleansed, some even soaked in resins that hardened like amber when dried, transforming the wrappings into a protective shell. But here's what most people miss: the wrapping wasn't uniform. The arms and legs were bound separately first, fingers and toes individually swaddled like precious artifacts, before the entire body was enveloped in layer upon layer, each pass of the linen carrying whispered invocations to the gods. The placement of amulets between these layers turned the wrapping into a kind of spiritual armor. A golden scarab might rest over the heart, inscribed with spells to silence its confessions during judgment. A miniature jed pillar, symbolizing stability, could be tucked near the spine to ensure the body's endurance. These weren't random trinkets. Their positions mirrored the constellations, aligning the mummy with divine forces. Archaeologists have found mummies with dozens of such charms hidden beneath their bindings, tiny gods in gold and faience standing sentinel against chaos. One pharaoh's mummy even revealed a meteorite iron dagger placed along his thigh, its celestial origin meant to slash through underworld demons. The linen itself told a story of social hierarchy. Pharaohs were wrapped in imported fabrics so sheer they shimmered like moonlight, while commoners made do with rougher, recycled cloth, sometimes even old sails or household linens. In some burials, researchers have spotted faint ink markings on the inner layers, prayers copied onto the strips themselves, as if the very fibers were woven with magic. The outermost bandages, though, were always showpieces, intricate geometric patterns or hieroglyphic texts inked in ochre and indigo, announcing the deceased's name and titles to the gods. What's astonishing is how these techniques evolved. Early mummies were haphazardly bundled, but by the New Kingdom, wrapping became an art form. Cross-sectional scans show how embalmers padded hollow areas with linen packets of sawdust or resin-soaked herbs to restore lifelike contours, an ancient form of restorative art. Some mummies even have false braids woven into their head wrappings, or delicate bead nets draped over their torsos like ceremonial armor. Every choice, from the tension of the knots to the direction of the folds, followed traditions passed down through generations. The final act was perhaps the most theatrical. Once fully wrapped, the mummy was coated in a warm resin mixture, sealing the linen into a glossy, dark shell. As it cooled, the resin emitted a fragrance that filled the tomb: myrrh, cedar, and cinnamon, the scents of paradise. To witness this moment would have been to see death transformed, no longer a corpse but a perfected being ready to step into eternity. Modern conservators note how this resin sometimes preserved the wrappings better than the body itself, leaving behind hollow shells of linen that still hold their shape millennia later, empty yet somehow alive with intention. This wasn't just preservation, it was alchemy. The Egyptians believed the wrapped body became a vessel for the Sahu, the spiritual body that could move between worlds. Every strip of linen, every amulet, every recited spell was a stitch in the fabric of immortality. When you see a mummy today, you're not just looking at a relic. You're seeing the culmination of a ritual that turned decay into divinity, one careful fold at a time. The final transformative act in the mummification process began with a substance so potent it could defy millennia: the slow, deliberate pouring of molten resin over the linen-wrapped body. Imagine the scene: priests heating blocks of tree resin over bronze braziers until it liquefied into a golden syrup, its rich, pine-like aroma mingling with temple incense. As the steaming liquid cascaded over the mummy's contours, it seeped into every fold of linen, hardening into a glossy carapace that served as both shield and sacrament. This wasn't just glue, it was a calculated fusion of chemistry and spirituality. The resin's sticky embrace did more than bind layers; it suffocated bacteria, repelled necrophagous insects, and created an airtight seal that slowed oxidation to a near standstill. Modern gas chromatography has detected traces of compounds like abiotic acid in these coatings, molecules with proven antimicrobial properties that still linger faintly in tomb air today. The choice of resin was anything but arbitrary. The Egyptians sourced the finest coniferous varieties from distant Lebanon, traded at great cost alongside cedarwood and myrrh. Each variety had symbolic resonance. Pine resin embodied eternal life due to the tree's evergreen nature, while frankincense resin carried solar associations, linking the mummy to Ra's daily rebirth. Some royal mummies received blends infused with rare ingredients: cinnamon bark oil for its preservative qualities, beeswax for flexibility, or even crushed malachite to tint the coating a sacred green. The result was a hybrid material, both practical and mystical, that modern conservators struggle to replicate. When Howard Carter unsealed Tutankhamun's innermost coffin in 1922, he noted how the resin had fossilized into a brittle, amber-like shell, fusing the king's wrappings to his golden mask in an unbreakable embrace. But the process held dangers. Overzealous application could warp the body's shape, or, as seen in some poorly preserved mummies, cause the resin to contract over centuries, crushing fragile bones beneath. Archaeologists have found mummies with cracked resin layers where embalmers failed to account for seasonal humidity, causing premature hardening. Yet even these failures reveal the Egyptians' empirical approach. Later dynasties adjusted their mixtures, adding palm wine as a plasticizer or applying resin in thinner, multiple coats. The mummy of Ramesses III shows this perfected technique. His coating remains intact after 33 centuries, still faintly aromatic when carefully scraped for analysis. The scent itself became part of the ritual. Ancient texts describe the resin's fragrance as the breath of the Western gods, a reference to the afterlife's lush fields of Iru. Tomb paintings depict priests anointing mummies with resin while chanting, "May your flesh be sweet to the nostrils of the gods." This olfactory dimension was crucial. Egyptians believed divine beings recognized souls partly by scent, a notion echoed in modern forensic science where decomposition odors carry unique chemical signatures. Some elite burials included resin-soaked linen sachets placed around the tomb, essentially creating an eternal air freshener for the afterlife. Perhaps the most poignant evidence of resin's power lies in the mummies of children. In 2019, researchers examining a tiny wrapped form from the Ptolemaic period detected traces of pistacia resin mixed with beeswax around the body, a gentler, more flexible formula likely chosen to cradle delicate remains. When sampled, it released a whisper of fragrance, a fleeting connection across time to grieving parents who sought to armor their child against eternity's ravages. That's the true genius of this practice. It wasn't just about preservation, but love crystallized into chemistry, a final act of care etched into molecular bonds that even time struggles to break. Among the most delicate challenges in mummification was preserving the face, the window to one's identity for both the living and the gods. Here, Egyptian embalmers turned to an ingenious solution: beeswax, warmed to pliability and carefully molded inside the nostrils and mouth. Unlike the rigid resins used elsewhere, beeswax offered gentle flexibility, allowing it to fill cavities without distorting delicate nasal bones or teeth. Picture an embalmer's hands pressing small, golden discs of wax into the sunken cheeks of the deceased, sculpting beneath closed eyelids to restore fullness, then smoothing the wax-lined mouth into a tranquil smile. The result was astonishing faces that appeared peacefully asleep rather than lifeless, their expressions frozen in a moment between worlds. This practice went far beyond aesthetics. Beeswax carried profound spiritual weight in Egyptian culture, associated with the sun god Ra's tears and the sacred bees of Lower Egypt. It symbolized resurrection. Just as bees vanished and returned seasonally, so too would the soul. Texts from the Book of the Dead describe the afterlife as a place where honey flowed endlessly, its sweetness echoing the wax's purity. Some mummies even had hieroglyphs for honey inscribed near their mouths, a plea to the gods to grant them eternal nourishment. Modern imaging has revealed how meticulously the wax was placed. In the mummy of Queen Nojmet, CT scans show beeswax plugs deep in her sinus cavities, a detail so precise it suggests specialized tools were used to insert them. The choice of beeswax also reveals the Egyptians' grasp of material science. Unlike plant resins that grow brittle over time, high-quality beeswax remains stable for millennia, resisting microbial growth while allowing subtle movement as temperatures shifted in tombs. Archaeologists have found mummies where the wax migrated slightly over centuries, settling into crevices like a second skin. Some royal mummies, like those from the 21st dynasty, show traces of tinted wax, mixed with ochre or charcoal to match skin tones, an early form of restorative artistry. But perhaps the most moving discovery came from a child's mummy in the Louvre. Conservators found a tiny wax figurine of Bes, the dwarf god who protected children, placed beneath the linen wrappings near the jaw. It wasn't just about preservation, it was a parent's final gift, ensuring their child's face would remain whole and guarded in the afterlife. When we see these faces today, their features softened by time, we're not just looking at clever embalming. We're witnessing the intersection of science and love, where every dab of wax was a prayer for eternity. One of the most unexpected ingredients in the mummification process wasn't some rare imported spice. It was the humble onion, a kitchen staple with hidden powers that astonished even modern scientists. Imagine embalmers carefully tucking golden onion bulbs beneath linen bandages, their pungent juices seeping into the wrappings like a natural antibiotic. But this wasn't just about preservation. Every layer of an onion mirrored the Egyptian concept of eternity, its concentric rings a perfect metaphor for the cyclical nature of life and rebirth. When researchers discovered mummies with onions placed over their eye sockets, they initially assumed it was mere packing material. Then they realized these were deliberate offerings meant to gift the dead with eternal sight in the afterlife. The science behind this practice is just as fascinating as the symbolism. Onions contain allicin and other sulfur compounds, the same antimicrobial agents that make them effective against infections today. When packed inside body cavities or crushed into pastes, they created a hostile environment for bacteria, complementing natron's drying effects. Some mummies from the New Kingdom show traces of onion pulp mixed with resin, a kind of ancient embalming paste that doubled as a spiritual preservative. The Ramesseum medical papyrus even prescribes onion-based poultices for wounds, proving Egyptians recognized its healing properties long before modern medicine caught up. But the onion's role transcended practicality. Its spherical shape echoed the sun disk of Ra, while its ability to sprout new growth from a single bulb made it a potent symbol of regeneration. Archaeologists have found onions threaded into necklaces, tucked into burial garments, even molded into amulets shaped like eyes. One particularly touching discovery was a child's mummy with tiny onion sprouts placed in its hands, a heartbreaking gesture suggesting parents hoped their little one would grow anew in the next world. The famous mummy of King Ramesses IV had onions strategically layered around his head, possibly to invoke the god Autumn, whose tears were said to have created humanity. What's remarkable is how this practice evolved. Early dynasties used whole onions, but later embalmers grew more sophisticated, extracting essential oils to anoint the body's orifices. Some elite burials included silver or gold-plated onion replicas, ensuring their magical properties would never decay. Even the onion's strong odor played a role. Egyptians believed gods communicated through scent, and the vegetable's sharp aroma was thought to carry prayers upward. Modern CT scans reveal how onions were sometimes the only organic material left in mummies' abdominal cavities after organs were removed, their papery skins perfectly preserved alongside gilded amulets. This humble vegetable's dual role as both a scientific tool and a sacred object encapsulates the Egyptian worldview. Nothing was merely functional. Every act, every material vibrated with meaning. When you slice an onion today and feel your eyes water, you're experiencing the same chemical reaction that once made priests see it as a bridge between worlds, a tearful reminder that even the simplest substances can hold extraordinary power. Once removed from the body, each organ embarked on its own sacred journey, a process so meticulous it blurred the line between science and devotion. The liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines weren't simply set aside. They were treated as individual entities, each wrapped in linen strips soaked in natron and aromatic resins. Picture embalmers working under oil lamps, their hands moving with the precision of surgeons as they anointed these organs with cedar oil and myrrh, substances chosen not just for their preservative qualities but for their celestial associations. The lungs, believed to hold the breath of life, might be dusted with powdered frankincense, while the stomach, often filled with ritual offerings of grain, could be layered with cumin, a spice thought to ward off evil spirits. The care given to the intestines reveals just how deeply the Egyptians revered every part of the body. These delicate tubes, carefully cleaned with palm wine, were sometimes stuffed with bundles of fragrant herbs like lavender or thyme before being wrapped. Tomb inscriptions describe them as the coils of Osiris, likening their twisting form to the serpentine paths of the underworld. Even the tiniest vessels received attention. Archaeologists have found linen-wrapped organ bundles no larger than a thumb, their threads still bearing traces of resin that glimmer under microscopes. This wasn't just preservation, it was a form of mapping, ensuring that every physical component could be recognized and reunited with the soul in the afterlife. What's striking is how these methods varied across social classes. A pharaoh's organs might be nestled in jars of alabaster lined with gold leaf, while a merchant's could be bundled in recycled linen and placed back inside the body cavity. Some mummies from the late period show inventive adaptations, like organs wrapped in papyrus scraps inscribed with protective spells, proof that even those of modest means found ways to honor the ritual's intent. The consistency, though, was in the reverence. Whether housed in a golden canopic jar or a simple linen pouch, each organ was prepared with the same unwavering belief that nothing could be left behind if the soul hoped to become whole again. Modern imaging has uncovered surprises hidden in these ancient packages. CT scans of one noblewoman's mummy revealed her liver wrapped in linen dyed with indigo, a color sacred to the gods, and tucked beside a tiny wax figurine of a winged Isis. Another showed a set of lungs packed with dried lotus petals, their veins still visible as delicate shadows beneath the petals' papery surfaces. These discoveries hint at a level of personalization we're only beginning to understand, where embalmers tailored their methods to the deceased's status, gender, or even personal piety. The ultimate testament to this practice lies in its longevity. When archaeologists unsealed the tomb of Yuya and Thuya in 1905, they found their organ packets perfectly intact after 34 centuries, the linen still crisp, the sense of spices faint but detectable. It's a reminder that for the Egyptians, resurrection wasn't a metaphor. It was a physical certainty, prepared for with the same diligence one might build a ship for an endless voyage. Every wrapped organ was a promise that no matter how far the soul wandered, the body would remain ready, piece by sacred piece, for its return. The moment the final layer of linen settled over the mummy's face, the artisans reached for their most sacred tools, brushes laden with gold leaf and pigments ground from lapis lazuli and malachite. A funeral mask wasn't merely placed, it was ceremonially fused to the wrappings, becoming the eternal face of the deceased. For royalty, this meant a likeness hammered from solid gold, its surface polished to mirror brightness so it might catch the first light of the afterlife. But even commoners received masks crafted from cartonnage, a blend of linen, plaster, and glue painted with care to reflect the idealized features of youth and vitality. The difference in materials didn't diminish the purpose. These visages were spiritual anchors, ensuring the soul would recognize its body amidst the chaos of the duat. Tutankhamun's mask, with its serene gaze and striped Neem's headcloth, is the most recognizable, but it's far from the only masterpiece. Recent scans of lesser-known masks reveal hidden layers of meaning. Some have microscopic inscriptions on their inner surfaces, spells from the Book of the Dead, etched so finely they'd only be read by the gods. Others, like the silver mask of Pharaoh Susens I, show deliberate alloy mixes. The silver symbolized bones of the gods, while gold flesh hinted at divinity. The eyebrows on these masks weren't arbitrary, they followed the precise curve of the sacred eye of Horus, a measurement believed to channel protective energy. Even the slight smile common to many masks held purpose. It mirrored the expression of Osiris in tomb paintings, a silent promise of resurrection. The process of creating these masks was as ritualized as mummification itself. Craftsmen worked in dedicated workshops near temples, purifying themselves with natron before touching the materials. Gold, considered the flesh of the gods, was beaten so thin that light could pass through it, a metaphor for the soul's translucence in the afterlife. Colors weren't merely decorative, each hue vibrated with meaning. The blue lapis lazuli background on many masks represented the night sky across which the sun god Ra journeyed, while green malachite stripes evoked the Nile's life-giving floods. Some masks, like those of queen consorts, incorporated glass inlays that caught torchlight in tomb chambers, creating the illusion of blinking eyes when air currents moved the flames. Perhaps the most poignant detail lies in what these masks concealed. CT scans of mummies like Amenhotep III show masks molded directly over the bandaged face, preserving the contours of the nose and lips beneath. In death, as in life, individuality mattered. A noblewoman's mask might feature earrings she wore in life, or a scribe's could include the faint ink stains on his fingers. This attention to personal detail reveals a profound belief that recognition in the afterlife wasn't just about the soul finding the body, it was about the gods recognizing the person. When Anubis weighed the heart, he needed to see the face of the one being judged. Modern technology has uncovered secrets the artisans never intended us to see. X-rays of the so-called mummy portrait, masks from Roman-era Egypt, show something astonishing: childhood scars or healed fractures painted beneath the idealized surface, as if the artists couldn't resist encoding the true person beneath the divine facade. Other masks, when examined under ultraviolet light, reveal hidden corrections where features were adjusted to better match the deceased. These weren't assembly line productions. They were portraits, labored over with the same care one might devote to a loved one's likeness. The power of these objects endures. When Tutankhamun's mask was briefly damaged in 2014, the global outcry wasn't just about art preservation. It was as if humanity collectively felt the rupture of an ancient promise. That's the true genius of these masks. They transcend time, culture, and belief. Whether you see them as sacred objects or masterworks of art, they remain what the Egyptians intended: a bridge. Not just between life and death, but between us and them, their hands and ours separated by millennia, yet reaching for the same unanswerable questions. The final act before sealing the tomb wasn't just ceremony, it was a moment of resurrection. Picture a priest standing over the mummy, a ritual adze in hand, its blade shaped like the constellation Ursa Major. With precise motions, he'd touch the tool to the mummy's lips while chanting ancient words. "I open your mouth for speech, your nostrils for breath, your eyes to behold Ra's light." This was the opening of the mouth, a ritual so vital that without it, the deceased would remain mute and starving in the afterlife, unable to plead their case before Osiris or taste the feasts of the Jewat. The tools used in this rite were as symbolic as they were practical. Alongside the adze, priests employed a forked peseshkef blade, its shape echoing the split hoof of Anubis to part the mummy's lips. A ceremonial spoon shaped like a duck's head might follow, scooping imaginary offerings of wine and bread toward the mouth. Even the materials carried meaning. The adze handle was often carved from meteoric iron, a substance believed to hold the power of the heavens. Archaeologists have found these tools buried in temple caches, their edges worn smooth from generations of sacred use. What's often overlooked is how this ritual mirrored the birth of Horus. According to myth, the falcon god's mouth was pried open at birth so he could avenge his father Osiris. By reenacting this moment, priests weren't just restoring function, they were aligning the deceased with divine vengeance against decay itself. The ceremony unfolded in 15 precise stages, each corresponding to parts of the body and elements of the cosmos. A priest might anoint the mummy's ears with hippopotamus fat, a symbol of rebirth, before touching a finger to its nostrils with the declaration, "You shall breathe the sweet north wind of eternity." Modern reconstructions reveal the ritual's layered acoustics. Chants were timed to resonate at specific frequencies within tomb chambers, creating vibrations that made the mummy's gilded mask shimmer as if alive. Offerings weren't merely symbolic. Scans of mummies like Ramesses II show traces of honey and milk residue in their oral cavities, actual substances placed during the rite to activate taste. Even the direction mattered. The ceremony always concluded with the mummy facing east, toward the rising sun's promise of daily rebirth. The most poignant evidence of this ritual's power comes from its omissions. Some working-class mummies show makeshift adaptations, a copper chisel used instead of gold, or a single priest performing all roles rather than the prescribed quartet. Yet even these pared-down versions carried the same desperate hope, that a mother might whisper comfort to her children in the afterlife, or a scribe could recite spells from the Book of the Dead. When archaeologists find mummies with slightly parted lips, whether by design or centuries of shifting resins, it's hard not to see them as frozen mid-breath, caught between a priest's invocation and the afterlife's answer. The mummification of animals in ancient Egypt wasn't just an imitation of human practices, it was a phenomenon of its own, revealing a worldview where creatures great and small held divine significance. Imagine walking through the catacombs of Saqqara, where millions of mummified ibis birds rest in pottery jars, their curved beaks still visible through linen wrappings. Or the crocodiles of Kam Ombo, each 5-meter-long predator carefully dried with natron, its toothy grin preserved for eternity. These weren't mere curiosities, they were sacred intermediaries, bridging the human and divine realms through rituals as elaborate as those for pharaohs. Take the case of the Apis bull, worshipped as the living embodiment of Ptah. When one of these revered animals died, it underwent a mummification process rivaling royalty. Its organs were stored in canopic jars adorned with bull-headed lids, and its body was encased in a wooden sarcophagus so massive it required sledges to transport. Modern scans of an Apis mummy from the Serapeum reveal something astonishing: layers of gold leaf beneath its bandages, a treatment reserved for gods. Even more touching are the smaller creatures, a puppy found curled in fetal position, its paws wrapped as if in sleep, or a falcon with outstretched wings, forever frozen mid-flight toward the afterlife. The techniques varied by species but shared the same meticulous care. Fish from the Nile were packed in salt and wrapped in diagonal linen patterns to mimic scales. Cats associated with Bastet often had their tails arranged artfully around their bodies, their ears perked forward in eternal alertness. Some animal mummies weren't even whole. X-rays of sacred ibis bundles show they sometimes contained just a single feather, proving it was the symbolic gesture, not the physical remains, that held power. What's truly remarkable is how these practices evolved. Early dynasties mummified animals sparingly, but by the late period, entire industries thrived. At sites like Tuna el Jebel, archaeologists found mass burial shafts stacked with thousands of baboon mummies, their faces painted with resin to resemble the god Thoth. Forensic analysis reveals some were recycled. Older mummies were wrapped during shortages, a practice that hints at both piety and pragmatism. The sheer scale is staggering. Estimates suggest over 70 million animal mummies were created, each one a physical prayer. The preservation quality still astounds scientists. In 2020, a team studying a lion cub mummy from the Bubastean necropolis discovered its whiskers remained intact, each one a fragile thread connecting us to a craftsman's hands 25 centuries past. Another project revealed how cobras were mummified mid-strike, their hoods flared in eternal defiance, a deliberate pose to channel the protective fury of Wadjet. Even insects weren't overlooked. Scarab beetles were dipped in resin and threaded onto necklaces, their iridescent wing cases still catching the light. This wasn't blind devotion. The Egyptians observed animals with a naturalist's eye, tailoring techniques to their biology. Birds, with their hollow bones, required delicate stuffing with mud and straw to prevent collapse. Crocodiles posed the opposite challenge. Their thick hides needed extra resin injections between scales. The famous Falcon of Horus at the Louvre showcases their mastery. Its beak was gilded, its talons sheathed in silver, and its body cavity packed with myrrh-soaked linen that still perfumes the display case. Behind every wrapped paw and coiled serpent lies a story of coexistence. A farmer might offer a mummified shrew to ensure his crops thrived, while a wealthy noble buried a gazelle to accompany him in the hunt beyond death. The most poignant are the pets like the tiny jerboa found nestled beside a child's mummy, or the greyhound whose bandages still bear the imprint of a collar. In these moments, the sacred and the personal blur, reminding us that for the Egyptians, the boundary between species was as thin as the linen they wrapped them in. Modern technology continues to unveil their secrets. Advanced imaging of a crocodile mummy from the British Museum revealed something unexpected. Beneath its outer wrappings lay dozens of baby crocodiles, carefully arranged around their mother. It's a discovery that reshapes our understanding. These weren't just offerings, but family units prepared for collective rebirth. Similarly, DNA analysis of cat mummies has traced lineages across dynasties, proving some temple animals were bred for generations as living vessels of the divine. The legacy of these practices echoes today. When wildfires threatened Egypt's archaeological stores in 2021, conservators rushed to save thousands of animal mummies, recognizing them not as macabre artifacts, but as testaments to a civilization that saw no hierarchy between life forms. In their silent rows, these creatures carry a message that devotion, like preservation, requires no distinction between human and beast, only the belief that every soul, whether encased in gold or feathers, deserves eternity. After the organs were removed and the body dried with natron, Egyptian embalmers faced a curious challenge: how to restore the natural contours of a now hollow torso. Their solution was as practical as it was poetic. They filled the empty cavity with a fragrant blend of sawdust, linen scraps, and crushed spices like myrrh and cinnamon. Picture the scene: priests carefully packing handfuls of this mixture into the abdominal space, molding it until the body regained its lifelike fullness. But this wasn't just about appearances. The sawdust, often cedar or acacia, absorbed residual moisture, while the spices acted as natural antimicrobial agents, slowing decay from the inside out. Modern CT scans reveal how meticulously this stuffing was arranged. Some mummies show layers of linen pads placed beneath the ribs to mimic muscle, or peppercorns clustered near the pelvis, their active compound piperine still detectable after millennia. The choice of materials was no accident. Myrrh, imported from the distant land of Punt, wasn't just a pleasant scent. It was the tears of the gods in Egyptian mythology, believed to purify and protect. When mixed with sawdust, it created a porous, breathable filler that prevented trapped gases from rupturing the delicate skin. Archaeologists have found some mummies where the mixture included unexpected additives: dried juniper berries near the heart, or crushed coriander seeds along the spine, each spice chosen for both its preservative properties and its symbolic resonance. The famous mummy of Ramesses II still exudes a faint herbal aroma when examined, a ghost of the embalmer's careful work. What's often overlooked is how this practice varied across social classes. Royalty might receive fillings blended with precious resins and powdered lapis lazuli, while commoners made do with Nile mud or chaff. Some late-period mummies show inventive substitutions, onion skins stuffed into the chest cavity, or even bundles of reeds shaped to mimic organs. The most touching examples come from child burials, where embalmers sometimes included tiny clay dolls or carved wooden toys among the packing materials, ensuring their youngest charges wouldn't enter the afterlife empty-handed. The spices served another crucial purpose. They masked the inevitable odors of decomposition during the 70-day mummification process. Ancient texts describe how embalming workshops were positioned downwind of cities, their heavy scents of cedar and frankincense overpowering less pleasant smells. But for the Egyptians, fragrance was more than a practical concern. They believed the gods perceived the world through scent. A well-spiced mummy would literally smell divine in the afterlife. Some tomb paintings depict Anubis leaning close to mummies, his jackal nose inhaling their aroma as a form of approval. Modern science has revealed surprising details about these mixtures. Gas chromatography of mummy stuffing from the British Museum identified over 30 compounds still active after 3,000 years, including thymol from thyme, a potent antifungal. Other studies show how sawdust was sometimes mixed with natron for extra drying power, or layered with resin-soaked linen to create a semi-rigid internal cast. The mummy of a Theban priestess even revealed bundles of mint leaves near her abdomen, their menthol crystals perfectly preserved, perhaps a final offering to soothe the stomach that once digested her earthly meals. Perhaps the most profound insight comes from understanding how these fillings mirrored Egyptian cosmology. Just as the universe was thought to be filled with the god Shu's invisible breath, the body's hollow spaces required sacred matter to maintain cosmic balance. When a priest packed sawdust into a mummy's chest, he wasn't just restoring shape, he was recreating creation itself, stuffing the void with materials that whispered of eternity. Today, when conservators gently remove these ancient packings, they're not handling mere refuse. They're holding the physical remnants of a belief that even emptiness could be made holy with the right ingredients. Among the most hauntingly beautiful touches in Egyptian mummification were the false eyes, carefully crafted orbs of quartz, obsidian, or glass that peered eternally from linen-wrapped faces. These weren't mere decorations, slotted into hollowed sockets after the brain's removal. Each eye served a divine purpose, to restore the deceased sight for the perilous journey through the Jewat. Picture an embalmer holding up two polished stone eyes in lamplight, their surfaces painted with intricate hieroglyphic patterns mimicking the iris's radial streaks, before nestling them beneath eyelids sealed with beeswax. The effect was startling, mummies that appeared not just preserved but eerily alert, as if suspended between worlds. The materials chosen reveal a deep understanding of symbolism and science. Rock crystal eyes, like those found in the mummy of a 21st dynasty priest, refracted light in tomb paintings' flickering glow, creating the illusion of liveliness. Black obsidian orbs discovered in royal burials mirrored the moon god Thoth's all-seeing gaze. Some late-period mummies even had eyes fashioned from Mediterranean sea glass, its aquamarine hue evoking the Nile's life-giving waters. Modern microscopy has uncovered astonishing details, pupils inlaid with jet beads to absorb evil spirits, or gold leaf flecks painstakingly applied to mimic the cornea's moist sheen. The mummy of a scribe named Nak, now in Toronto's Royal Ontario Museum, still startles visitors. His alabaster eyes retain faint traces of red ochre veins, giving them an uncanny realism across 3 millennia. But these eyes were more than artistic triumphs. the Book of the Dead spells make their function clear. May my eyes be opened that I may see the face of Ra when he crosses the sky. Without them, the soul risked wandering blind through the afterlife's labyrinthine corridors. Some funerary texts describe the eyes as the Ujjat, the healed eye of Horus, a symbol of wholeness and protection. Archaeologists have found mummies with eyes deliberately angled upward, a line to witness the moment of resurrection when the tomb was reopened in the afterlife. Others, like a noblewoman's mummy in Leiden's museum, had one eye slightly larger than the other, a possible nod to the mythological battle where Horus lost and regained his eye, representing cyclical renewal. The craftsmanship borders on the supernatural. X-rays of a child's mummy from the Louvre show glass eyes with hollow centers, possibly designed to hold a drop of sacred oil for anointment in the afterlife. Another set from a Theban musician's burial had copper wire nerves trailing from the back, connecting them symbolically to the brain's former pathways. The most exquisite examples come from Tani's royal cache. Queen Henetmeyer's eyes were fashioned from blue faience with gold foil backing, their surfaces etched with microscopic prayers visible only under magnification. What's often overlooked is how these eyes evolved alongside Egyptian beliefs. Early dynasties used simple linen pads painted with eyes, but by the New Kingdom, artisans created layered masterpieces, a base of polished wood for depth, overlaid with colored resins and topped with transparent quartz. Some Ptolemaic-era mummies even had eyes that could be opened and closed via tiny linen hinges, allowing the deceased to sleep between rituals. The message was clear: death wasn't an end, but a transition requiring all one's faculties intact. Modern technology has revealed secrets the embalmers never intended us to know. CT scans show some eyes were inserted with the optic nerve facing backward, a deliberate act ensuring the deceased could look inward to navigate the soul's hidden realms. Others, like those of Pharaoh Amenhotep II, contain hidden compartments holding miniature papyrus scrolls inscribed with spells against blindness. The most poignant discovery came from a non-royal burial in Saqqara, a young girl's mummy with one eye slightly askew, as if the embalmer adjusted it to match her childhood strabismus. Even in eternity, individuality mattered. These eyes still hold power today. When researchers at the Manchester Museum experimented with lighting angles on a mummy named Asru, her quartz eyes suddenly activated, reflecting light in a way that made visitors gasp. It's an echo of their original purpose to bridge the seen and unseen, convincing both the living and the gods that the person within the wrappings was still present, still watching. In that silent exchange across millennia, the ancient Egyptians achieved something beyond preservation. They made death itself blink. The wrapping of a mummy was far more than a practical step. It was a sacred geometry lesson in linen form. Each strip's placement followed an invisible blueprint, where the angle of a fold or the tension of a knot carried cosmic significance. Picture the embalmers at work, their hands moving with the precision of temple scribes as they crossed the arms over the chest in the exact posture of Osiris, the god whose resurrection promised eternal life to all who mirrored him. This wasn't mere imitation. It was an act of sympathetic magic, aligning the deceased with the divine blueprint of rebirth. Even the materials held meaning. Linen spun from flax, a plant that regrows after harvesting, became a metaphor for cyclical renewal with every layer applied. The diagonal patterns often seen in elite burials weren't decorative accidents. These precise, crisscrossing bands mirrored the net-like structure of the sky goddess Nut's body, as described in pyramid texts. Just as she arched over the earth with stars dotting her form, the wrappings created a celestial map across the mummy's body. Modern imaging reveals how these patterns varied by status. pharaohs might have 7 diagonal layers representing the 7 celestial cows of Hathor, while officials received 5 for the 5 planets visible to the naked eye. Some mummies, like that of the priest Nesmin, show alternating clockwise and counterclockwise spirals around the limbs, a nod to the solar and lunar cycles that govern temple rituals. The feet received special attention, often wrapped separately in intricate latticework resembling sandal straps. This wasn't just about preserving toes, it ensured the deceased could walk the treacherous paths of the Jewat without stumbling. Archaeologists have found mummies where the big toes were individually bound with gold caps inscribed with the Ankh symbol, turning each step into an act of regeneration. The hands, too, told a story. A scribe might have his fingers wrapped to hold the ghostly semblance of a brush, while a warrior's hands could be shaped into fists clutching unseen weapons. Perhaps the most profound detail lies in what these patterns concealed. Infrared scans of Ramesses III's mummy revealed hieroglyphic texts inked directly onto the inner layers, spells from the Book of the Dead woven into the very fabric touching his skin. Other mummies show linen strips dyed different colors at specific intervals: red for the blood of Isis, blue for the heavens, green for new growth. The outermost layers often bore repeating eye motifs, not just the Ujjat, but thousands of tiny protective symbols forming a literal second skin of vigilance. This sacred geometry extended beyond the visible. The total length of linen used in royal mummification, sometimes exceeding 1,000 square yards, corresponded to numerical values in temple architecture. The diagonal span from shoulder to foot might match the height of a cult statue's plinth, while the circumference of the head wrapping could echo the dimensions of the solar bark's oars. Even the knots held power. CT scans show they were always tied in odd numbers, as even numbers were associated with completion and therefore death's finality. The wrapping's final act was the most theatrical. As the last layer was secured, priests poured resin along the seams, creating a gleaming, unified shell. When hardened, this surface was sometimes inscribed with a false door motif, a spiritual portal allowing the soul to come and go. To witness this transformation was to see chaos bound into order, a human form remade as a perfect, eternal equation. Today, when we see these patterns in museums, we're not just looking at ancient bandages. We're seeing the universe as the Egyptians understood it, measured, balanced, and infinitely renewable, one sacred fold at a time. Among the most surprising ingredients in the mummification toolkit was honey, a substance so remarkably effective at preservation that modern scientists still marvel at its antibacterial potency. The Egyptians didn't just drizzle honey over bandages, they used it with surgical precision, filling body cavities and coating linen strips in thick, golden layers that hardened into a protective shell. Imagine a priest pouring warm honey into the hollowed abdomen of a nobleman, the viscous liquid seeping into every crevice before cooling into an impermeable barrier against decay. This wasn't just practical, it was poetic. Just as bees transformed nectar into everlasting sweetness, the embalmers used honey to turn mortality into eternity. The science behind honey's preservative power is staggering. Its high sugar content creates a hypertonic environment, sucking moisture from bacterial cells until they shrivel and die. Enzymes added by bees generate hydrogen peroxide, a natural disinfectant, while its acidic pH makes it inhospitable to microbes. Modern studies show honey can inhibit even antibiotic-resistant bacteria, a fact the Egyptians observed empirically. When archaeologists unwrapped the mummy of a 5th dynasty official, they found his honey-treated bandages virtually free of decay, with traces of thyme pollen still embedded in the residue, suggesting an added herbal boost. But honey's role transcended chemistry. In Egyptian mythology, bees were born from the tears of Ra, making their product a divine substance. Tomb paintings depict gods offering honey to the deceased as food of immortality, while funerary texts describe the afterlife as a field where honey flows in rivers. Some mummies, like that of a chantress named Istimkeb, had honeycomb fragments placed in their hands, a direct ticket to the god's banquet. The sweetest discovery came from a child's burial in Saqqara, a tiny ceramic jar clutched to the chest, still holding crystallized honey after 4,000 years, its lid sealed with the image of a bee. The artistry of honey's application reveals sophistication. CT scans show how embalmers layered it between bandages like edible glue, sometimes mixing it with resin for extra rigidity. In royal mummies, honey might be infused with saffron or lotus extract, creating customized flavors for the afterlife. One noblewoman's mummy from the Middle Kingdom had her thoracic cavity packed with honey-soaked linen balls, each one wrapped to resemble a pomegranate, a fruit symbolizing resurrection. Even external treatments were deliberate. Some mummies show honey brushed onto the lips and eyelids, ensuring these delicate areas would remain supple for the soul's reawakening. Honey's use wasn't limited to human mummies. Sacred animals like the Apis bull were sometimes embalmed with honey wax blends, their bandages glistening as if dipped in sunlight. Archaeologists found a crocodile mummy at Kham Ombo with honey still pooled in its gaping jaws, a final offering to Sobek, the crocodile god who devoured unworthy souls. The most touching examples come from pet burials. A greyhound named Abotio was discovered with honey-coated paws, perhaps so he'd leave sweet footprints in the afterlife. What modern researchers find most astonishing is how well honey's properties held up. In 2019, chemists analyzing a honey residue sample from a 21st dynasty mummy detected intact antimicrobial peptides molecules that remained biologically active after 30 centuries. Other studies reveal how embalmers exploited regional varieties. Delta honey with high propolis content for its antifungal properties, or Upper Egyptian wildflower honey rich in thymol. This wasn't haphazard, it was apiculture meets mortuary science. The legacy of this practice lingers literally on our tongues. When you stir honey into tea today, you're handling the same substance that once glued eternity together, a golden thread connecting breakfast tables to burial chambers. For the Egyptians, honey wasn't just a preservative. It was the taste of forever, bottled by bees and brushed onto death itself, ensuring that what passed beyond wouldn't just endure but remain sweet. The ancient Egyptians understood that even the smallest details could unravel eternity, including fingernails. When the body dried out during mummification, nails risked loosening and falling away, leaving the deceased incomplete for the afterlife. Their solution was both practical and poetic. Delicate threads of linen or gold wire wrapped around each nail bed, anchoring them in place like tiny mooring lines. Some royalty took this further, sheathing their fingertips in gold caps so thin they shimmered like liquid sunlight. Imagine the care required, a craftsman bending over a noblewoman's hands, securing each nail with knots finer than a spider's web, ensuring not a single part of her would be lost to time. These nail treatments reveal a philosophy where nothing was insignificant. The Book of the Dead mentions nails specifically. They had to remain intact so the soul could grasp the oars of Ra's solar bark and navigate the afterlife. Modern CT scans show how meticulous the embalmers were. Some mummies have resin injected beneath the nail plates for extra adhesion, while others show traces of henna staining, hinting at pre-mortem grooming rituals preserved in death. The mummy of Pharaoh Amenhotep III still wears his gold nail covers, their edges embossed with miniature scenes of the gods, Anubis weighing a heart on one thumbnail, Thoth recording the verdict on another. The materials told stories of their own. Commoners might have simple linen threads, but nobles could afford electrum or lapis lazuli caps. One surprising find was a child's mummy with acacia thorn clamps piercing the cuticles, an early form of surgical anchoring. The most opulent examples come from Tanis, where King Susen's I silver coffin held hands adorned with gold foil nails, each one etched with his throne name in hieroglyphs smaller than a grain of rice. What's often overlooked is the symbolism behind these choices. Fingernails, which grow continuously in life, represented eternal renewal. By gilding them, Egyptians transformed a biological process into a divine attribute. Some nail covers were deliberately left slightly loose, not poor craftsmanship, but a nod to the belief that the deceased would continue growing in the afterlife. Recent multispectral imaging has revealed hidden details. On Queen Maritamon's mummy, nearly invisible lotus-shaped perforations in her gold caps allowed fragrant oils to seep through, scenting her fingertips for eternity. The contrast between techniques speaks volumes. While some mummies show nails reinforced with fish glue or beeswax, others, like the scribe Annie, had miniature papyrus scrolls tucked beneath them, inscribed with spells against decay. A warrior's mummy from Abydos still bears leather thongs tying his nails, the material oiled for flexibility across millennia. Even the direction of the threads mattered. They were always wound clockwise, mirroring the sun's journey across the sky. Perhaps the most poignant discovery came from a non-royal burial in Deir el-Medina. A young mother's mummy had her child's tiny milk teeth woven into the threads around her nails, a heartbreaking attempt to keep them connected beyond death. This wasn't vanity or extravagance. It was the conviction that every fragment of a person, down to the crescent of a fingernail, held cosmic significance. When you see these golden sheaths in museums today, remember, they're not just jewelry. They're the final, gleaming safeguards of a civilization that refused to let even the smallest part of a soul slip away. The Egyptians believed even hair held power in the afterlife, which is why many mummies were buried with lustrous wigs or carefully styled extensions, their curls frozen in time by dollops of beeswax. Picture an embalmer's workshop where bundles of human hair, some imported from distant Nubia for its tight coils, were arranged beside pots of fragrant styling balm. These weren't mere post-mortem accessories, they were spiritual necessities, ensuring the deceased would arrive in the Jewat looking as vibrant as they did in life. Recent CT scans of a noblewoman's mummy from Thebes revealed something astonishing. Her elaborate braided wig still clung to her scalp, its strands interwoven with golden threads that caught the torchlight during her funeral procession. The craftsmanship behind these wigs rivals modern hairdressing. Some were constructed with delicate mesh foundations of linen or palm fiber, allowing ventilation while anchoring each hair with knots so tiny they're barely visible under magnification. Others, like those found on male officials, featured shorter, layered styles stiffened with resin to maintain precise shapes. The most opulent examples come from the tomb of Queen Ti, whose wig contained over 120,000 individual hairs, each one secured with beeswax mixed with frankincense to repel insects. What's often overlooked is the social coding embedded in these styles. Curled wigs signaled youth and vitality, while straight-haired versions denoted wisdom, a visual language that transcended death. Beeswax was the unsung hero of this process. Applied warm, it allowed stylists to sculpt intricate updos or spiral curls that hardened into permanence. Archaeologists have found combs still tangled with resinous wax beside mummies, their teeth spaced to create specific wave patterns. Some wigs even show evidence of coloring henna for red highlights, indigo for blue-black sheens, proving the Egyptians understood hair as a canvas for identity. The mummy of a young singer named Tamat had her extensions arranged to cascade over one shoulder, a style popular among living court musicians, as if she might perform for the gods themselves. The symbolism ran deeper than vanity. Hair was thought to channel divine energy. The god Osiris was said to have green hair representing fertility, while the serpentine locks of the demoness Apep embodied chaos. By adorning mummies with wigs, priests weaponized these associations. A nobleman's wig might be sprinkled with powdered lapis lazuli to mimic the night sky, aligning him with Nut's celestial protection. Children's mummies often wore wigs threaded with protective amulets, tiny hands of Fatima or Ankh symbols woven directly into the strands. Modern forensic analysis reveals surprising details. DNA testing on hair from a Memphis-era mummy showed it came from multiple donors, suggesting wigmakers blended textures for ideal volume. Microscopy on another sample uncovered pollen grains from flowering plants pressed into the wax, perhaps a final fragrant gift. Most poignant is the mummy of an elderly woman from Akhmim. Her thinning natural hair augmented with a wig whose interior padding matched the contours of her scalp, compensating for hair loss with tender precision. This practice wasn't static. Early dynasties favored simple, functional wigs, but by the New Kingdom they became architectural marvels. The wig of Princess Sitamun towers nearly 30 centimeters high, its lattice structure supporting cascades of curls interspersed with turquoise beads. Later, under Roman influence, some mummies wore wigs mimicking imperial fashion's tight curls, framing the face like Empress Papia's famed style. Even in death, Egyptians kept pace with trends. The legacy of these wigs endures beyond archaeology. When conservators at the Egyptian Museum studied Ramesses II's hair, they found its original auburn hue preserved by the very wax that styled it, a fluke of chemistry that kept his royal vibrancy intact for 33 centuries. It's a reminder that for the Egyptians, death wasn't about relinquishing identity but perfecting it. Every coiled strand, every drop of scented wax whispered the same promise: you will not fade. You will be recognized, you will remain. The journey to eternity didn't end with the last layer of linen. Instead, the mummy was entrusted to a series of nested coffins, each one a fortress against the chaos of the underworld. Imagine the innermost coffin, carved to mirror the body's contours with eerie precision, its surface gleaming with gold leaf and hieroglyphs that pulsed with protective magic. This wasn't just a box, it was a second skin, a sculpted sanctuary where every curve and inscription whispered spells to guide the soul. The most elaborate examples, like Tutankhamun's iconic golden coffin, fit so snugly around the mummy's wrappings that they seemed less like containers and more like metallic echoes of the person within. The symbolism of these nested layers ran deep. Just as the universe was believed to be encased within concentric spheres of divine energy, the coffins formed a physical echo of cosmic order. Outer coffins, often rectangular and painted with scenes of gods, acted as gateways to the divine realm, but the innermost coffin, shaped like the body itself, served a far more intimate purpose. Its tight embrace ensured no part of the deceased would be lost or scattered in the afterlife, a concept so vital that some coffins even included false braids of faience beads or carved fingernails to reinforce the illusion of wholeness. Modern CT scans reveal how closely these coffins mirrored their occupants. The mummy of a young princess from the 21st dynasty still bears the faint impression of her coffin's inner lining on her bandages, as if the wood remembered her shape long after her burial. The spells inscribed on these coffins weren't mere decorations. They formed a literal armor of words, with each hieroglyph acting as a shield against demons. Take the coffin of the priest Ankh-Fn Khonsu, now in the Louvre. Its interior is covered in columns of tiny, precise text from the Book of the Dead, arranged so the mummy would lie atop them like a sleeper resting on a sacred manuscript. Some spells were placed with tactical precision. Incantations to thwart Apep, the serpent of chaos, often wound around the ankles, while appeals to Hathor for mercy might cluster near the chest. The underside of the coffin lid frequently bore a painted image of Nut, the sky goddess, her star-studded body arched protectively over the deceased. To be sealed inside was to be cradled in the heavens themselves. Materials mattered as much as design. Commoners might have coffins of plain sycamore, but royalty demanded cedar imported from Lebanon, its resinous scent believed to repel decay. The famed yellow coffins of the New Kingdom used vibrant ochre to represent the golden flesh of the gods, while Ptolemaic-era elites favored coffins with layered gesso and gilding that reflected lamplight like miniature suns. One surprising discovery in the tomb of Seneptisi revealed a middle-class woman buried in a coffin lined with Nile mud, a humble yet clever substitute for precious metals, as the Egyptians believed the river's silt held regenerative powers. The craftsmanship bordered on alchemy. Artisans steamed thin sheets of wood to mold them around torso-shaped forms, creating seamless joins that still baffle modern carpenters. Some coffins, like those of the brothers Kh, Num-Nakht and Nakht-Ankh, were so precisely weighted that their lids could be shifted with a fingertip yet remain airtight when closed. The innermost layers often held hidden surprises. A nobleman's coffin in Turin was found to have a compartment beneath the headrest containing a lock of his wife's hair, while another in Berlin concealed a papyrus scroll mapping secret routes through the Jewat. What's often overlooked is how these coffins evolved alongside Egyptian beliefs. Early dynasties used simple rectangular sarcophagi, but by the Middle Kingdom, the body-shaped design emerged, likely inspired by the myth of Osiris, whose dismembered form was reassembled by Isis. Later, under Greek influence, some coffins featured painted portraits on wooden panels, their lifelike eyes seeming to follow mourners around the tomb. The most poignant examples come from children's burials, where tiny coffins were carved with toys or pets along the sides, ensuring their occupants wouldn't be lonely in the afterlife. Modern technology has revealed secrets the coffin makers never intended us to see. Hyperspectral imaging of a 22nd dynasty coffin in Chicago showed layers of paint beneath the visible surface. An earlier version where the deceased was depicted with a different title, suggesting his status changed between commission and burial. Another scan detected honey mixed into the adhesive of a coffin's joints, its antibacterial properties unknowingly preserving the wood for millennia. When conservators lifted the innermost lid of Pharaoh Seqenenetau's coffin, they found faint palm prints in the gold leaf, the hurried marks of workers sealing him in, their own humanity pressed into his immortality. These coffins weren't just containers, they were time capsules of belief, where every material, every glyph, every brushstroke conspired to cheat oblivion. To open one today is to breach a sacred boundary not just between life and death, but between our world and one where wood could be made divine and gold might buy eternity. Hidden beneath the linen layers, pressed against the skin or nestled between folds of bandages, lay the true guardians of the afterlife amulets so potent that even the gods respected their power. The Egyptians didn't just scatter these charms randomly. Each one was placed with the precision of a surgeon, its position dictated by ancient texts that mapped the body's spiritual anatomy like constellations. A golden scarab beetle rested over the heart, its wings folded to mimic the sun's daily rebirth. A carnelian eye of Horus might be sewn into the wrappings above a wound the person bore in life, ensuring divine healing in the next world. These weren't decorations, they were a kind of metaphysical circuitry conducting sacred energy through the mummy's form. Consider the Jed pillar amulet, shaped like a backbone and often carved from lapis lazuli. Placed along the spine during wrapping, it promised the deceased would stand firm like Osiris in the afterlife, their body as unshakable as the pillars of heaven. Modern CT scans reveal how carefully these amulets were positioned. One noblewoman's mummy had 34 tiny Jed amulets lining her vertebrae, each one aligned with a gap between her actual bones. Even more astonishing are the two-finger amulets found tucked in the pelvic regions of some mummies' ivory or obsidian carvings of a hand's index and middle fingers, meant to magically assist in the dangerous act of rebirth, as if the gods themselves were pulling the soul into the next life. The materials chosen weren't arbitrary. Green feldspar amulets shaped like lotus leaves symbolized resurrection because the plant submerged and rebloomed daily. Red jasper amulets carved into tight knots, often called the Knot of Isis, were drenched in menstrual blood symbolism, linking them to life's cyclical renewal. Even fragile substances had roles. A scribe might be buried with a papyrus amulet inscribed with a single hieroglyph, its ink mixed with Nile water to harness the river's life-giving magic. The mummy of a priest named Uzamontu contained an amulet made from a meteorite fragment, its extraterrestrial origin believed to connect him directly to the stars. Some amulets served shockingly specific functions. A clay crocodile amulet sewn into a child's wrappings wasn't just a general protector. It targeted the demonic crocodile of the West, said to prey on young souls. Gold foil amulets shaped like sandals ensured the deceased wouldn't walk barefoot through the Juwat's fiery sands. The most poignant might be the heart scarabs placed over chest cavities, their undersides inscribed with a plea to the heart itself, "Do not testify against me." These weren't passive charms, they were active negotiators with the divine, bargaining for the soul's survival. The sheer variety is staggering. Archaeologists have catalogued over 100 amulet types, from silver snakes that coiled around bandaged arms to faience ankhs no larger than a fingernail. Some, like the winged Isis amulets found on late-period mummies, were layered creations, gold wings soldered onto lapis lazuli bodies, with inlaid garnet eyes that glittered in tomb shadows. Others were startlingly humble. A fisherman's mummy contained a netted bundle of garlic cloves labeled as an amulet against hunger, while a baker's held a miniature loaf of bread baked so hard it survived millennia. What modern science reveals about these objects deepens their mystery. X-ray fluorescent studies show many amulets were charged by rubbing them with magnetite or lodestone, giving them literal magnetic properties the Egyptians interpreted as divine attraction. Others, like the famous Blood of Isis amulets, were soaked in pomegranate juice before burial, their red stain symbolizing the goddess's protective rage. Even their placement followed hidden codes. Amulets near the head often faced east for wisdom, while those at the feet pointed west, the direction of death's domain. Perhaps the most revealing discovery came from a 21st dynasty mummy now in Turin. When conservators carefully unpeeled its chest wrappings, they found not just one scarab amulet, but 23, each smaller than the last, nested together like Russian dolls. At the center lay a scarab carved from a single piece of amber, warm to the touch even after 3,000 years. It's a perfect metaphor for Egyptian spirituality, layer upon layer of meaning, with eternity glowing at its heart. These amulets remind us that for the ancients, death wasn't an end, but a delicate operation requiring every available tool, where a beetle carved from stone could outweigh a mountain in the balance of the soul. Of all the amulets placed upon a mummy's body, none held more weight literally and spiritually than the heart scarab. This palm-sized artifact, often carved from dark green serpentine or glimmering black basalt, wasn't merely decorative. It served as the deceased's final advocate in the Hall of Judgment, where the heart would be weighed against the feather of Maat. Picture the scene: Anubis adjusting his golden scales, Thoth poised to record the verdict, and the soul's fate resting entirely on this single organ's testimony. The Egyptians believed the heart, not the brain, housed all memory and emotion, meaning it could recount every lie, every unkind deed, every moment of weakness. The scarab's purpose: to silence those confessions before they tipped the balance toward doom. The spells inscribed on these scarabs reveal a fascinating blend of morality and magic. Unlike other amulets bearing generic protections, each heart scarab was personalized with Chapter 30 of the Book of the Dead, a plea addressed directly to the heart itself. Do not stand against me as witness, do not oppose me in the tribunal. Some versions escalated to outright bargaining. If I have sinned, let it be as the weight of a feather. This wasn't about denying wrongdoing, it was a ritual recalibration, ensuring the heart's testimony aligned with the soul's idealized self. Modern linguists have noted how these texts often switched between first and third person, as if the deceased both pleaded with their own heart and commanded it simultaneously, a psychological dance between accountability and grace. Crafting these scarabs required extraordinary precision. The underside, pressed against the mummy's chest, bore the spell in crisp hieroglyphs, while the dome top was polished to reflect the dim torchlight of the tomb, a miniature sun disk echoing the scarab god Khepri's daily rebirth. Some royal examples, like the lapis lazuli scarab found on Tutankhamun's mummy, had wings inlaid with gold foil, transforming them into hybrid creatures capable of fleeing unfavorable judgment. Even the stone's veining mattered. Artisans selected materials with natural streaks resembling blood vessels, reinforcing the illusion that the scarab had fused with the organ beneath. Placement was a science in itself. The scarab wasn't simply laid atop the bandages, it was sewn into a specific layer, often with gold wire threading through tiny holes in its base to anchor it directly over the heart's location. CT scans of the mummy of the priest Nebseni show his scarab positioned at a 15-degree angle, aligning with the slant of the solar box massed as depicted in tomb paintings. This subtle tilt wasn't arbitrary, it ensured the spells funneled upward toward the gods. Some mummies, like that of a noblewoman named Istimkeb, had additional miniature scarabs stitched along major arteries, creating a symbolic network of silence radiating from the core. The heart scarab's evolution mirrors shifts in Egyptian spirituality. Early versions from the Old Kingdom were crude and uninscribed, relying solely on the scarab's innate symbolism of transformation. By the Middle Kingdom, they'd grown larger, with spells wrapping around their edges like protective coils. The New Kingdom introduced heart scarabs for non-royal elites, democratizing access to divine leverage. One poignant example from Deir el-Medina belonged to a scribe who couldn't afford stone. His scarab was molded from Nile mud mixed with his own saliva, its spell hastily scratched with a reed pen before firing. Even in poverty, the ritual held power. Modern technology has unveiled secrets the Egyptians never intended us to know. Hyperspectral imaging of a 21st dynasty scarab revealed traces of myrrh oil beneath its hieroglyphs, likely anointed during the opening of the mouth ceremony to activate its voice-silencing magic. Another, scanned at the British Museum, showed microscopic gold particles embedded in the stone, suggesting it was rubbed with electrum dust to enhance its conductivity with divine energies. Most haunting is a scarab from the Louvre, whose underside bears faint fingerprints in the clay, preserved as its maker pressed the spell into the surface 3,000 years ago. The ultimate test of these artifacts' efficacy lies in their absence. Mummies lacking heart scarabs, whether due to oversight or poverty, often show signs of psychological unease in their burial arrangements. A commoner's tomb at Abydos contained a papyrus scrap tucked in the mummy's arms, its crudely written plea, "Let my heart stay silent as the scarab I could not afford." It's a reminder that for the Egyptians, the afterlife wasn't just a spiritual destination, but a courtroom where the heart's testimony required both ethical living and meticulous magical preparation. When you see one of these scarabs in a museum today, you're not just looking at a carved beetle, you're holding an ancient lawyer's closing argument, polished smooth by desperate, hopeful hands. Buried beneath layers of linen and amulets, often placed between crossed arms or tucked beneath the head, lay the most personal roadmap to eternity, the Book of the Dead. Far from a standardized text, these papyrus scrolls were meticulously tailored to the individual, blending spellwork with intimate details of the deceased's life like a celestial resume. Imagine a scribe hunched over a fresh sheet of papyrus, mixing ink with water from the Nile as he transcribed spells selected specifically for a merchant who'd sailed the Red Sea or a mother who'd lost children in childbirth. Each column of hieroglyphs wasn't just copied, it was curated with passages added or omitted based on the person's deeds, fears, and hopes for the afterlife. The result, a one-of-a-kind survival guide for navigating the Duat's treacherous landscapes, where knowing the right spell to calm a demonic gatekeeper could mean the difference between paradise and oblivion. The contents of these scrolls reveal a breathtaking duality: universal truths woven with personal pleas. A typical Book of the Dead contained around 200 spells, but no two copies were identical. Spell 125, the famous negative confession, might be expanded for a vizier listing his legal rulings, "I judged without favor," while a farmer's version emphasized agricultural virtues, "I did not divert irrigation water." Some included illustrations so specific they bordered on portraiture. The scribe Anna's papyrus shows him and his wife in linen garments dyed with patterns matching those found in their actual tomb. Others incorporated local folklore. A scroll from the Delta region includes a unique spell against the crocodile of the Western Oasis, referencing a regional predator absent from Theban texts. The physical craftsmanship of these scrolls was as vital as their content. Papyrus sheets were spliced together with starch, glue to create length sometimes exceeding 30 feet, then painted with pigments mixed from malachite for green skies or ground lapis lazuli for the midnight hair of gods. Wealthy patrons could commission scrolls with gold leaf accents, like the gilded vultures on the Book of the Dead belonging to Queen Nejmet, their wings outstretched to form the hieroglyph for eternity. But even humbler versions showed astonishing care. A middle-class baker's papyrus now in Turin uses cheaper red ochre instead of cinnabar, yet still includes tiny marginal drawings of his favorite bread molds as mnemonics for certain spells. What's often overlooked is how these texts functioned as interactive objects rather than passive readings. Many scrolls bear fingerprints in their margins, not from carelessness, but from active use during funeral rites. Priests would unroll them across the mummy's body during the opening of the mouth ceremony, chanting directly from the papyrus as incense swirled. Some spells included instructions like recite while standing on one foot or hold a faience ankh to the north, transforming the scroll into a script for ritual performance. Infrared imaging has revealed even more subtle details. The Book of the Dead of the priest Amenhotep shows faint charcoal underdrawings beneath its inked lines, evidence of a draftsman's careful planning before committing spells to permanence. The Book of the Dead's true power lay in its adaptability. Over its 1,000-year usage, spells evolved to reflect changing beliefs. Early versions emphasized physical survival, "My bones shall not decay," while later editions focused on moral justification, I gave bread to the hungry. Some wealthy New Kingdom individuals commissioned multiple scrolls for different purposes. General Hormheb was buried with one emphasizing military metaphors. I crossed the battlefield of the gods like Montu, alongside another filled with pastoral imagery. Even the formatting shifted Middle Kingdom texts flowed in vertical columns, but by the late period, horizontal lines became standard, perhaps to mimic the orderly fields of the afterlife. Modern technology continues to unveil lost layers of meaning. Multispectral scans of the Greenfield Papyrus, the longest known book of the dead at 120 feet, detected erased and rewritten sections where a woman's name was replaced by her husband's, hinting at marital strife beyond the grave. Another scroll, when exposed to ultraviolet light, revealed doodles of Bes, the dwarf god, in its margins likely added by a scribe's apprentice practicing between solemn spells. These human touches remind us that these weren't just sacred texts, but objects handled by real people grappling with mortality's mysteries. The legacy of these documents transcends their papyrus and ink. When a Book of the Dead was placed in a tomb, it wasn't merely stored, it was activated. Spells explicitly state that simply possessing the scroll granted power, as if the words themselves vibrated with latent energy waiting to be unleashed in the Jewat. To hold one today is to feel that potential still humming beneath its surface, a testament to the Egyptian belief that the right words, written with the right intent, could bend the universe itself. The Embalmer's Toolkit was a marvel of ancient innovation, a collection of bronze and obsidian instruments so finely crafted they could navigate the body's pathways with near-surgical precision. Picture a slender bronze hook, its tip curved like a crescent moon, designed to extract the brain through the nasal passage without fracturing the delicate ethmoid bone. Or consider the flint knives, their edges honed to a micron-thin sharpness, capable of making clean incisions along the left abdomen to remove organs with minimal tissue damage. These weren't crude implements, they were the product of generations of anatomical knowledge, each tool specialized for a single purpose in the meticulous dance of preservation. Modern forensic analysis reveals just how advanced they were. Scans of mummies show incision marks so precise they suggest the embalmers understood the body's layers down to the muscle fiber. What's astonishing is how these tools evolved alongside Egyptian medical expertise. Early dynastic embalmers used simpler instruments, but by the New Kingdom, their kits resembled a surgeon's tray. Archaeologists have uncovered slender needles for stitching incisions, spatulas to pack cavities with natron, and even retractors to hold skin flaps open during organ removal. The materials mattered as much as the design's. Bronze, prized for its antimicrobial properties, was alloyed with trace silver to reduce corrosion. Some knives featured ivory handles carved with images of Anubis, transforming each cut into a divine act. A particularly revealing find from Saqqara was a toolkit buried with its owner, the instrument still nested in a linen roll with faded hieroglyphs labeling each slot: hook for the right nostril, knife for the sacred cut. The true genius lay in their adaptability. Embalmers adjusted techniques based on the body before them, using wider blades for obese mummies to prevent jagged cuts, or finer hooks for children's delicate sinus cavities. Recent CT scans of a nobleman's mummy from the 21st dynasty show something remarkable. The embalmers repaired a broken rib postmortem by threading gold wire through the bone, a practice echoing modern orthopedic surgery. Another mummy, that of a young woman, reveals smoothed edges around her pelvic incision, suggesting they used a primitive form of cauterization with heated tools to minimize bleeding. Beyond functionality, these tools carried profound ritual significance. Flint knives, though outdated by the New Kingdom, were still used for the initial incision, a nod to the legend where Thoth fashioned the first embalming blade from meteoritic iron. Needles were sometimes dipped in resin mixed with ground malachite, turning each stitch into a channel for healing energy. The most sacred tool, the adze used in the opening of the mouth ceremony, wasn't even sharp. Its power lay in its shape, mirroring the constellation Ursa Major to align the mummy with celestial forces. Modern experiments with replica tools have shattered assumptions about ancient limitations. When surgeons tested bronze hooks on cadavers, they found the curvature matched the natural anatomy of the nasal passage perfectly, reducing collateral damage compared to straighter modern instruments. Another study showed flint knives could make cleaner cuts than steel scalpels on dehydrated tissue, explaining their persistence in embalming rites long after bronze became available. Even the embalmer's saws, used occasionally to remove damaged limbs pre-mummification, had teeth spaced to minimize bone splintering, a detail only visible under electron microscopes. The legacy of these tools extends beyond Egypt. Roman-era medical texts reference Egyptian-style hooks for procedures, while Byzantine surgeons adopted their needle designs for suturing wounds. Today, the precision of these ancient instruments challenges our timeline of medical progress, proof that innovation in the hands of masters isn't bound by era. When you see these tools in museums resting quietly behind glass, remember, they weren't just objects, they were the steady hands between life and eternity, carving a path to immortality one meticulous cut at a time. The canopic chest stood as a masterpiece of sacred geometry, its 4 compartments precisely aligned to the cardinal directions like a compass for the soul. Carved from cedar or alabaster, its walls often bore the faces of protective deities Isis, Nephthys, Neith, and Selkut, their watchful eyes ensuring no harm would come to the vessels within. This wasn't mere storage. It was a microcosm of the universe itself, with each jar's placement echoing the Egyptian belief that the body's organs mirrored celestial patterns. The liver rested in the southern quadrant, associated with the heat of life, while the lungs occupied the northern chamber, symbolizing the cool breath of eternity. The craftsmanship of these chests reveals layers of hidden meaning. Some featured detachable lids shaped like the stepped pyramids of the Old Kingdom, transforming the act of opening them into a symbolic ascent to the heavens. Others, like the chest of Tutankhamun, had interior surfaces inlaid with silver, a metal believed to be the bones of the gods, creating a divine barrier against decay. The most elaborate examples incorporated secret compartments beneath the jars, holding miniature papyri inscribed with spells tailored to each organ's function. A scan of one nobleman's chest revealed a hidden resin-coated scroll beneath his stomach jar, its text promising no hunger in the field of reeds. Beyond physical construction, the chest's rituals were equally profound. During burial ceremonies, priests would circle it 7 times once for each of the celestial cows of Hathor while sprinkling natron to purify the space. Paintings in the tomb of Sennacherib show the chest being anointed with oils using a brush made from a giraffe's tail hair, an animal associated with foresight, as if to grant the organ's vision in the afterlife. Modern examinations have detected traces of these rituals. The chest of Queen Khawat still bears fingerprints in its resin coating, left by a priest pressing protective amulets into the soft material before it hardened. The evolution of these chests tells a story of spiritual innovation. Early versions were simple rectangular boxes, but by the New Kingdom, they'd become miniature architectural wonders. A chest from the reign of Amenhotep III replicates a temple pylon down to the cavetto cornices, complete with tiny carved sentries guarding its corners. Later, under Greek influence, some chests took on anthropomorphic forms, like one in Alexandria shaped as a kneeling Osiris. his torso hollowed to hold the jars where his own organs would reside. The most poignant adaptations come from non-royal burials, where craftsmen improvised with painted pottery or even stacked reed baskets, proving the symbolism mattered more than the materials. What emerges from studying these chests is a philosophy of sacred containment. The Egyptians didn't just preserve organs, they created a ritual universe where even the stomach had its own chapel, the lungs their celestial observatory. When archaeologists lift the lid of a canopic chest today, they're not just uncovering ancient pottery, they're opening a door to a world where every fragment of existence, whether a drop of bile or a breath of air, was worthy of reverence, enshrined in a temple no larger than an embrace. At the threshold of eternity, the ancient Egyptians believed a single moment determined everything: the weighing of the heart, a ceremony so profound it fused morality with cosmic justice. Imagine standing in the Hall of Judgment, surrounded by towering deities as Anubis adjusted the scales before you. On one golden plate rested your heart, still bearing every joy and regret from your lifetime. On the other, the feather of Maat, so light it could float on a whisper, yet heavy with the weight of divine truth. This wasn't just myth, it was the ultimate audit, where the contents of your soul were measured against the universe's unwavering standards. The ritual's brilliance lay in its simplicity. Unlike fiery hells or blissful heavens of other traditions, the Egyptian afterlife hinged on equilibrium, a perfect balance between action and consequence. The heart, believed to be the seat of memory and emotion, carried an exact record of every deed. Even more fascinating, the Egyptians anticipated human imperfection. Spell 30 of the Book of the Dead wasn't a denial of wrongdoing but a plea for perspective. If I have sinned, let it be as the weight of a grain of sand. They understood that a life couldn't be flawless, only honestly reckoned. The gods' roles in this drama reveal a nuanced theology. Thoth, the ibis-headed scribe, stood ready to record the verdict, but it was Ammit, the dreaded devourer, who waited in the shadows, her crocodile jaws parted for hearts heavy with deceit. Yet even she wasn't purely monstrous. By consuming the unworthy, she maintained cosmic order, recycling chaos back into the universe's fabric. Meanwhile, Osiris, enthroned in white wrappings, presided not as a punisher but as a merciful judge, his presence a reminder that redemption was woven into the very structure of existence. Archaeological finds bring this ritual to life in startling ways. A 21st dynasty papyrus depicts a noblewoman's heart not on the scale but cupped in Maat's hands, a tender revision suggesting compassion could temper judgment. Another scene from the tomb of Nefertari shows her heart-sprouting arms, lifting the feather effortlessly as if buoyed by good deeds. Even the tools had layers of meaning. The scale's crossbeam was often shown as the hieroglyph for sky, implying the weighing bridged earth and heaven. What's often overlooked is how this ritual permeated daily life. Farmers prayed to have hearts light as chaff during harvest, while viziers commissioned heart scarabs inscribed with ledger-like lists of their just rulings. The most touching evidence comes from a scribe's ostracon found at Deir el-Medina, where he'd practiced the hieroglyph for heart hundreds of times, as if perfecting the symbol could lighten his own. Modern psychology finds eerie resonance in this ancient practice. The heart's weight metaphor mirrors our guilt's physical toll, while the feather's duality, fragile yet unyielding, echoes how truth feels both liberating and exacting. When we stand before our own metaphorical scales today, measuring actions against integrity, we're closer to the Egyptians than we realize. Their genius was recognizing that eternity isn't about perfection but balance, and that the lightest hearts aren't empty but at peace. The tombs of ancient Egypt weren't just burial chambers. They were fortresses of eternity, engineered with layers of deception, and divine intimidation to outwit even the most determined thieves. Step inside one of these labyrinthine structures, and you'd find yourself navigating a maze of false corridors, each dead end meticulously carved to resemble the real path. The builders went so far as to install massive stone portcullises that could drop without warning, sealing intruders in darkness, but the most ingenious trick. Hidden burial chambers suspended high above the main tomb, accessible only through shafts too narrow for looters to squeeze through, yet perfectly aligned with celestial events to guide the pharaoh's soul. Inscriptions on the walls served as more than decoration, they were psychological warfare. Near the entrance of Ramesses VI's tomb, a hieroglyphic curse warns, "The crocodile be against them in the water, the scorpion against them on land." Other tombs featured vivid depictions of thieves being struck by lightning or devoured by Ammit, the underworld's devourer. These weren't empty threats. Archaeologists have found skeletons in collapsed tunnels, their fingers still clutching stolen artifacts, as if the curses had materialized. The most chilling discovery came in 1922, when Howard Carter's team uncovered a clay tablet in Tutankhamun's antechamber bearing the words, "Death shall come on swift wings to him who disturbs the peace of the king." Within months, Lord Carnarvon, the expedition's financier, died mysteriously, fueling global fascination with the so-called mummy's curse. Yet the true masterpiece of tomb security lay in its sacred geometry. False doors, painted with such realism they fooled even experienced archaeologists, concealed the real passageways. Some tombs, like those in the Valley of the Kings, were designed with descending corridors that flooded during the Nile's annual inundation, creating water traps timed to the seasons. Others employed sand traps, chambers filled with loose sediment that would suffocate anyone breaking through the walls. Even the choice of materials played a role. The Pyramid of Amenem, Hat III used limestone blocks so precisely fitted that not even a blade could slip between them, while the burial chamber's ceiling was lined with massive granite slabs to deter tunneling. What's often overlooked is how these defenses evolved alongside tomb robbers' tactics. Early dynasties relied on sheer mass pyramid cores contained over 2 million stone blocks, but later pharaohs embraced psychological deterrence. The tomb of Senusret II featured a decoy sarcophagus filled with scorpions, while Susens I hid his gold-filled burial behind a wall of mummified baboons, knowing their sacred status would give thieves pause. Modern ground-penetrating radar has revealed even more sophistication. Some tombs have hidden chambers accessible only by removing a single, unmarked brick, or staircases that only appear when torchlight hits the walls at a precise angle. The ultimate irony, these elaborate measures often failed. Papyrus court records from Thebes detail tomb robberies where thieves outsmarted every trap, sometimes by bribing the very priests who designed them. Yet in a way, the tombs succeeded beyond their builders' wildest dreams, not by preventing theft, but by sparking a global obsession that's kept their occupants' names alive for millennia. When you see a reconstructed tomb in a museum today, you're not just looking at a relic of ancient security. You're witnessing a dialogue across time, where the living and the dead remain locked in a game of wits with eternity as the prize. Behind the sacred temples and beyond the gilded tombs, the true architects of eternity toiled in secrecy, the embalmers of ancient Egypt. These weren't just laborers following rote instructions. They were master artisans, chemists, and spiritual guides rolled into one, their hands performing miracles with linen and resin while their minds held knowledge more tightly guarded than royal treasure. Picture the embalming workshops along the Nile's western bank, where palm frond screens shielded their work from prying eyes, and the air hung heavy with the scents of myrrh and natron. Here, in these unassuming structures, generations of specialists refined their craft through trial and observation, passing down techniques so precise that modern scientists still struggle to replicate them. What set these embalmers apart was their dual mastery of science and ritual. The Heri Seshta, or overseer of mysteries, wasn't just a mortician, he was a high-ranking priest who understood how a single misplaced incision could doom a soul's journey. His team included specialists like the Hetimu Netja, who removed organs with the precision of surgeons, and the Wetiu, who wrapped bodies with the care of artists, restoring priceless tapestries. Guild rules forbade sharing methods outside their ranks. A papyrus from the Temple of Thoth warns that divulging secrets would make one an enemy of Maat, doomed to wander thirsty forever. This exclusivity explains why some mummification details remain enigmatic, like the exact formula for the divine nectar resin that made Tutankhamun's skin gleam after 33 centuries. The embalmer's toolkit reveals astonishing sophistication. Flint knives, though primitive by modern standards, were preferred for the initial incision because their ultra-sharp edges caused minimal tissue damage, a fact confirmed by microscopic analysis of mummy wounds. Bronze hooks used for brain extraction show where patterns suggesting they were resharpened after every use, maintaining perfect curvature to navigate sinuses without fracturing bone. Even their linen selection followed strict protocols. Infrared scans reveal some royal mummies were wrapped in fabric woven with alternating thread densities, tighter weaves over joints to resist unraveling, looser over the torso to allow resin penetration. Their workspace was a laboratory of the sacred. Excavations at Saqqara uncovered an embalming chamber with drainage channels for bodily fluids, sloped tables to angle bodies during drying, and even labeled jars for organ preservation, some marked with lunar calendars indicating optimal days for specific procedures. All inscriptions describe a 70-day process divided into 4 phases mirroring the moon's cycles, with rituals performed at precise hours. The most revealing find was a set of cubit rods marked with notches corresponding to ideal incision lengths based on the deceased's height, proof that their methods followed mathematical precision rather than guesswork. Perhaps their greatest legacy was adaptability. When the Nile flooded disrupted Natron supplies, records show embalmers improvising with desert salts and tamarisk ash. During political unrest, when imported resins grew scarce, they developed plant-based alternatives so effective that some late-period mummies are better preserved than Old Kingdom royalty. A tragic example comes from a mass burial during a pandemic, where overworked embalmers streamlined techniques without compromising quality, wrapping victims in recycled linens but still including heart scarabs and canopic jars. The ultimate testament to their skill lies in what they didn't record. No surviving manual explains how they achieved such uniform desiccation without overdrying, or why certain mummies' hair retains original color when modern preservation fails to do so. Their greatest secrets died with them, not as forgotten knowledge, but as sacred trusts they refused to betray. When you gaze upon a mummy's serene face today, you're not just seeing a preserved ruler. You're witnessing the unspoken oath of countless nameless masters who turned mortality into their canvas, their silent expertise echoing louder than any pharaoh's glory. From brain extraction to golden masks, these 26 techniques reveal a civilization that didn't just confront death, they danced with it, transforming decay into divinity. The Egyptians saw mortality not as an end, but as a doorway, and their mummification rituals were the keys they crafted with unimaginable precision. Think about the sheer audacity of it. In a world without microscopes or modern chemistry, they pioneered methods so effective that we're still unraveling their secrets today. Whether it was the alchemy of Natron drying flesh to paper-thin resilience, or the sacred geometry of linen wrappings mirroring the cosmos, every step was a testament to their unwavering belief that life could and would continue beyond the grave. What's truly humbling is how these techniques blur the line between science and spirituality. The embalmers who removed organs with bronze hooks were also priests who whispered spells to guide each body part into the afterlife. The artisans who sculpted golden masks weren't just creating art, they were forging eternal identities for souls to wear before the gods. Even something as mundane as an onion became a symbol of regeneration, its layers echoing the cycles of rebirth. This duality is what makes their legacy so enduring. They didn't compartmentalize knowledge into sacred and secular. To them, a well-placed amulet and a perfectly measured dose of resin were equally vital in the quest for immortality. Consider the ripple effect of their innovations. The same antibacterial resins that preserved mummies likely informed early medical treatments for wounds. The metallurgy behind Tutankhamun's gold mask pushed ancient craftsmanship to its limits, inspiring jewelry techniques that spanned continents. Even their obsession with documentation, recording every spell, every material, every ritual, laid groundwork for the scientific method. In a very real sense, the pursuit of eternity accelerated their understanding of the tangible world. Yet beyond the technical marvels lies a deeper truth. These practices were acts of love. The child buried with a honey-coated toy, the widow who tucked her braid into her husband's wrappings, the craftsman who spent weeks perfecting a single scarab amulet, they all speak to a universal longing to hold onto what matters. That's why mummies still captivate us. They're not just artifacts, they're time capsules of hope, defiance, and reverence frozen in linen and gold. So which technique leaves you in awe? Is it the brain extraction, a feat of anatomical intuition, the heart scarabs, silent advocates in the hall of judgment? Or perhaps the false eyes, forever watching for dawn in the underworld? Share your thoughts below. And if you've ever wondered what other mysteries lie buried in the sands of time, join us as we keep unearthing history's greatest secrets. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an excavation into the